Hi, I'm Lauren Gisto. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid Services of Oregon. And today I'm going to talk about our Protect Your Family packets that we've created. These packets are really important for people to understand, but it's also good that everyone knows that this is not legal advice. It's really just information to help you understand these packets, and that no part of this presentation creates an attorney-client relationship. Also, this information is accurate as of March 2025, but things are changing, so it's always important to check with a lawyer before relying on this information. So the packets we have are called Protect Your Family. They're available in English and Spanish, and this slide has the link if you wanted to go get those packets. They're important for everyone. Even though this resource is created with immigrant parents in mind who may be concerned about deportation or being held, all parents could really benefit from having a plan for their minor children's care in event that something happens where they're unavailable or they're incapacitated. So we really encourage all families to learn this information and to use the information from these packets. So I'm going to be going over some of the legal forms. These packets have a lot of information in them, but just today, I'll be talking about the legal forms. And to be prepared for those forms, there's a couple key legal terms. The first is custody. So that's when someone has the authority to make decisions regarding a minor child. Often a parent would have legal custody. And there's also guardianship. So that's if someone other than a parent has legal custody and gets to make decisions for a child. So these forms will reference parent, guardian, or custody. So it's just important to know what those mean. The two forms, the main ones that I'll be talking about, are the delegation of parental guardian powers or the relative caregiver affidavit. These two forms are similar in that they designate the caregiver being able to make decisions for a child if a parent is unavailable. But they're a little different in when you fill out the form. So the first form, the delegation of parental guardian powers, grant is something that a parent or a guardian would fill out, that you would then choose who you want the caregiver to be. And it's something you do in advance, just in case you're to prepare for being unavailable to take care of your children. Whereas the relative caregiver affidavit is something that happens after the fact. If a parent's not available, a family member can then fill out this form in order to make decisions for a child. So that first form is available on page 11 of these packets. So if you're following along the packet, I definitely recommend going to that page. They ask you to designate an attorney in fact, but it doesn't have to be an attorney. It's just a legal term, meaning the person who's going to be providing care for the child. It's valid for up to 6 months from the date a parent becomes unavailable. So not the date that you fill it out, not the date that the parent gives it to someone, but if that parent in the future becomes unavailable or, is incapacitated, not able to make decisions for their child, it then goes into effect and is in effect for 6 months. It's important that these forms get filled out in English. So we have, a handout that's in English. We have a handout in Spanish. If you are filling the Spanish handouts out, or you're helping someone who fills out the Spanish handout, it'll have the form in English and in Spanish. The Spanish form is there to help you understand what the questions are, but it's the English form that actually is legally binding and needs to be filled out. It's also important to know that the parents or the guardian of the child can revoke it at any time. So if you're a parent and you designate a family member to be a caregiver, you become unavailable, the caregiver is taking care of your kids, but then you're able to take care of the kids again. You come back to the country or whatever happens, like if you're, in a medical emergency and you recover, you can then revoke this at any time. So it's important to think about who you want to designate as that caregiver. It has to be someone who's over the age of 18 and a legal adult, somebody who's reliable and consistent. We recommend someone who's a US citizen or a green card holder. This isn't required, but it just is one more guarantee that they will be available to care for your children. And it's also important to think about people who know your kids, who are able to make decisions for them, and who you trust to give your children back after the fact. So here's the form itself. And that's, again, page 11, the delegation of parental guardian powers. We're just going to talk about how to fill it out. So the first couple of things are putting in the full name of your child and their date of birth. If you have more than 3 children, you would use multiple forms. So if you have 9 children, you're going to use 3 forms. Then you write down where it says full name of attorney in fact. That is the caregiver that you want to provide care for your children if you're not available. Provide their contact information. Then at the bottom of the form, it has boxes to check. The first box is if you want to give a general delegation that sort of grants all of the powers a parent would normally have to make decisions for a child. If you don't want to grant all those powers, but you just want to grant specific things like medical care or education, then you would check the second box. But you pick one of those 2 boxes. The next page of this form is just stating that it goes into effect once something happens, like an arrest, deportation, incapacity that makes the parent unavailable, and that it lasts for 6 months. If somebody's in the U.S. Armed Forces, it's a little different, and so that's what that second box is for. But for most parents, it's going to be that first box that you're going to select. Then you sign it, and it's important to know that this does not need to be notarized. So you don't need to go out and spend money to get this notarized, and it doesn't have a date on it because it doesn't go into effect until something happens in the future when that parent becomes unavailable. We recommend people make 3 copies and do original signatures on each of those copies. Give one to the caregiver that you've chosen to take care of the children in the future if something happens. Keep one at home and have one that's kept on the children, like in their backpack or something. Of course, it's also a good idea to provide it to a daycare provider, the school, or medical provider if you're concerned about something's going to happen so that they have that information. And it's important to talk to your children, even though this is a really tough subject. That way the kids know, what's going to happen if you become unavailable so that they're also prepared and they know what the paperwork means and who to give it to. And part of this is also just planning ahead generally. You have this, the form, the delegation form, but it's also good to give that person who's chosen as a caregiver other important information about the children, to make sure that they have copies of all of the children's important documents like passports, birth certificates, things like that, and give them the information they need, where your kids go to school, who their doctors are, emergency contacts, so that there's not a scramble if something happens, but everyone has sort of a plan and knows how to proceed. Another important thing that's on this slide is giving the caregiver your emergency or the emergency contact, your A number, if someone has this, which is on immigration documents. That way, if somebody gets detained, they can be looked up at the A number, and that's how your family can know where you are and what's going on in your case. As I had mentioned before, this delegation of powers can be revoked. If you look on page 13, that has the form that revokes the delegation of powers. And it can be revoked at any time, even before the expiration date, by the parent. It's important that parents know this so they don't feel like they're giving up rights if they are able to take care of their children. The best way to do a revocation is in writing and to give that revocation to all the people that you gave the original delegation to. So if you gave it to a medical provider, make sure they have the revocation form as well. And this is the form itself. And so you can see the top, it has, again, the names and date of birth of the children. Make sure that the names match, that, the full name that you put on the delegation of powers, you want to put on the revocation. And again, if you have more than 3 children, you would just use multiple forms. And then at the bottom, you would date. The date that you put where that little arrow is on this slide is the date that it went into effect. So when the parent became unavailable, and then the parent signs it and then puts the date that they are revoking it. Again, this form does not need to be notarized. So that's sort of the first set of forms. Now, the second forms that are important are the relative caregiver affidavits. And these forms are done after the fact if a parent is unavailable and didn't do the delegation or didn't make that plan ahead of time, and the child's now with a family member and that family member needs to take some action to provide care. So this is page 13 of the packet. And this is the first forms that we were talking about are filled out by the parent. This form is filled out by the family member. They have to be related by blood, adoption, or marriage in order to fill out this form. And it allows that person to consent to medical treatment and educational services for a minor child. The relative who's providing the care has to be at least 18 years old. And they have to put on the form what they've done to try to communicate with the parents to see what the parents want for their children. That relative is also responsible for any medical costs or treatment that they authorize using this form. This form cannot be filled out in advance, unlike that delegation that we previously talked about. It, again, is only done after the fact if a parent's unavailable. Again, this form has to be filled out in English. And it's sometimes a good idea if you haven't done the delegation of powers and you are a parent to give relatives this form so that they have it in case it's needed. It expires after 1 year that it's been filled out by that caregiver, or if the child stops living with the relative. So here's the form itself. And, the relative fills it out, puts the child's name, the parents' names, the information for the caregiver. Again, it's important to put the full legal names of everyone, including date of birth. And they also have to state their relationship to the child to establish if they are a family member, either by marriage, adoption, or birth. And so that would be like, for example, I'm the child's grandmother. Then at the bottom, they need to put how they've tried to contact the parents. So they would mark which parents that if you don't, like, say you have the mother's contact information, but not the father's, then you would put on that first box, that I do not have the contact information for the father. And then you would say, I have tried to contact the mother on that next box. And then on the next page, you explain how you've tried to contact them by, mail, email, social media, sending letters, all those things that you've tried to do to get in contact. Then get signed by that family member who wants to be the caregiver. Again, does not need to be notarized. So those are the two main forms, but there is a third form in this handout, which is if someone is going to be traveling with a child and they don't necessarily have custody of that child. So generally, if one parent is trying to take a US citizen child outside of the country without the other parent, they usually need a letter from the other parent authorizing travel with that child, unless they have sole legal custody that's already been designated by a court, court order that they have sole legal custody, or there's only one parent. The traveling adult also needs to have, the child's birth certificate or their passport, sort of those important documents that are needed to travel. And if somebody's traveling, it's not their child, they usually need a signed affidavit from both parents. So this form, which is also in the packet, is for authorization to travel with a minor. Again, you don't have to use this exact form, but it's something that we've created that you can use. It's the main difference between this form and the other forms we've gone over is that this one should be notarized. It's highly recommended by US Customs and Border Protection to have this letter notarized. And if you're traveling with a child that's not yours, make sure to get one of these letters from each parent. So those are all the legal forms that I will be talking about. But I also just wanted to highlight some of the other things about this Protect Your Family packet. It has a great list of all of the documents that you need to get together, the important things, just, listed on here: school information, immunization records, social security cards, sort of all those important documents to start collecting, making copies of, along with the legal forms that we've talked about. This packet also has a good outline of information for the children. So for each child, you'd fill out just the important things. Where did they go to school? Who are their doctors? What's their teacher's name? Things that a relative might not know that they need if they're going to be providing childcare. And so that's all that I have for today, but it's a great packet. Again, we recommend all parents do this because anyone can be, due to an emergency, unavailable to care for their children. And it's good to have a plan, to have caregivers ready to go, and to have all of the legal documents that are needed. Thank you.